Hey everybody, hope that everybody's doing well. And today I want to focus in on two things actually in relation to our new module. The first is research, in particular academic research, also known as scholarly research or finding peer-reviewed sources. So there's three different sort of phrases that'll all mean the same thing. What is it? But we're gonna talk about what academic research is, how to find scholarly sources, and in particular in relation to our documentary films or programs or series. And the other thing is to start thinking about how to analyze documentary films. Uh, I mean, there is a chance that from our last essay, you've already, had some practice in terms of analyzing a music video, which is obviously a similar medium to a documentary film or program, but obviously there's going to be different things to think about, different elements to consider, and so thinking about documentary analysis will be another goal for this lesson. So let me switch as usual on over to sharing my screen, and to first talk about documentary research. And let me put some captions on here. And so um, one of the things that wasn't required in our last essay, though a few of you actually utilized it anyway, because you must have had experience before with academic research. But one of the things that's going to be required for this second essay is to use academic sources. We obviously used sources in our last essay, provided MLA citations and MLA works cited, and those are things that are going to be consistent for all of our essays we do in this class. So, but this time around, I want you to gain some experience and practice the craft of academic research. And this isn't to say anything's bad about non-academic research, but I'll explain what both those things mean, and then we'll talk about how to find academic sources. So one thing to consider before we do any of that is, why do research? I mean, it might seem something that's obvious, but I think it's good to sort of keep in mind what's the purpose whenever you're doing anything, honestly. But what's the purpose when we're learning, when we're practicing these different concepts? What's the purpose of doing research for these papers? And some of these will probably be familiar, and maybe some will be enlightening. I mean, one thing obviously is just to inform and acquaint yourselves with a topic or a focus. And here I'm talking about research, whether it's academic or non-academic, or scholarly or non-scholarly, right? So, I mean, this is probably we look things up, right, all the time. You don't know what something is, or you don't know about some event or something that's happening, you look it up. Or, you're going to write about, you're going to write about such and such documentary, let's say like the documentary Blackfish, then you're going to go look it up. So that's one of the obvious and most common reasons we use research, even if it's just looking something up on Wikipedia just to get a sense of what it is. Um, the other reasons are exploration, discovery, and then also as a catalyst. And so exploration and discovery are sort of similar, right? Just finding out more about a particular topic, right, or a particular focus, but also at the same time discovering things. I often stumble upon something while I'm researching something else and realize, like, ooh, maybe I want to write about that. For example, I might have been doing a little bit of research, in relation to my documentary film, and then I stumbled across another documentary film. That might be something, a moment of discovery. As far as catalyst, what I mean by that is that research can have a sort of productive effect, which is to say, it's like, wow, that process of discovery sort of really got my mind sort of opened my eyes towards something that I hadn't been thinking about. So it inspires me to sort of go further and keep thinking and developing ideas. Um, the other thing, and this comes out of when we're talking about what a critical analysis does, is that it allows us to move beyond common knowledge, right? We start digging beneath the surface of whatever it is we're analyzing. You know, what people know commonly about a particular topic or a focus is something that we obviously want our papers to go beyond. So what a critical analysis does is it goes into the depth and detail that most people don't. And that's why people appreciate and enjoy critical analysis and argument, is because it's actually doing something. It's teaching people about things that they don't know from sort of common knowledge. So that's one of the main reasons, and that's particularly happens. That happens with non-academic research, but it particularly happens with academic research. As we will see, one of the big differences between academic sources and non-academic sources is that academic sources go much more in depth, have much more analytical detail most often. Um, Couple last ideas is that it's just to join and find a place or a position in a conversation. A good way to think about outside sources, right? There's, let's say you find multiple articles, non-academic and academic, about your documentary. You should view those articles as all having a conversation, right? Many cases they're talking to one another, I mean, indirectly, right? Or they're citing one another, they're building ideas, they're disagreeing with one another, they're disagreeing and then building on those ideas with one another. And in many cases, what we're doing as we do some research is understand what is the conversation that's already out there. What have people already said about my documentary film or program, and then what are things that, therefore, finding my own place. Okay, what could I say that's a little bit different? Or maybe I want to agree with this but build upon it, or maybe I want to really counter, completely disagree with this and go in a totally different direction. So I can understand what the conversation is surrounding whatever it is I'm writing about, in this case, a documentary film or program. And then finally, the goal is just to evolve ideas and innovate, right? I'm going to do research so I can better understand what's already been said, and then say something at least a little different, or something that moves the conversation forward. Um, I mean, you hear about scholars and scientists, and I don't care what field you're in. A lot of people do research as a way to evolve their field. So what is the latest thinking in education? What is the latest thinking in psychology? What is the latest thinking in dance? What is the latest thinking in film? Well, there's all kinds of journals out there that are dedicated to various fields, and that's really scholarly research where this is happening, right? So where fields are being evolved and innovated forward. Um, Finally, let's get to the sort of difference. What's the difference between academic and non-academic research? Um, just sort of quickly stated, and let me get right to it. Non-academic research is the research that we're probably most used to doing and that we already know about, which is, I'm just going to go ahead and type into Google the title of my documentary film or program and see what comes up. And there's going to be all kinds of stuff that comes up. The film itself might come up, trailers for the film, blog posts about the film, the Wikipedia entry on the film, articles about the film, film reviews, so on and so forth. There's going to be all kinds of material, and the majority of that material is going to be non-academic. And so that means blogs, newspapers, magazines, and I mean newspaper articles on the web, magazine articles on the web. Um, and for the most part, non-academic research is all about finding out information, discovering things, and also just understanding what the general conversation is about, in this case, your documentary film or program. Now, academic and scholarly research, what's different about this is that it comes from peer-reviewed journals. Now, this is different from, say, like your editor, your managing editor at the New York Times. A peer-reviewed journal is a situation, let's say I wanted to write an article, let's say I wanted to publish whatever my paper is about whatever documentary film. There's a bunch of film journals out there. Academic journals aren't things that you find like on a regular newsstand. The academic journals are usually in scholarly libraries, or like our university library, but they're also connected to databases, online databases with scholarly journals. And these are the places where scholars, people who are thinkers and creators in various fields, share their ideas. They publish articles. So let's say I wanted to publish an article about I wanted to publish my essay, turn it into an article and publish it in a journal, an academic journal. I'm going to send that into that academic journal. And first it's got to be, accepted, of course. But once it's accepted, it gets peer reviewed by other scholars in the field. So suddenly I have four, five, three, maybe film scholars or documentary film scholars who are analyzing my article and vetting it. I wouldn't say just vetting it. They're going through it, making suggestions, comments, asking questions. And when you publish an article in an academic journal, you get before it even happens, you get a long, well, I'll speak for myself. I get a long sort of, multiple page response from multiple scholars in that field, or people who know that text. And they give me all kinds of feedback, and then I go and revise and da, da, da. So, point is, scholarly research goes through a sort of a long peer review process, um, by which it's sort of, you're refining your ideas, and therefore it's really often more well researched, and usually published in scholarly journals that are associated with universities, like the University of North Carolina Press, or Duke University Press, or I don't think Montclair State University has their own press, but Columbia University Press, whatever it might be. So academic articles tend to be far more researched, right? So you see a lot of footnotes, you see big works cited or bibliography, and they are peer reviewed by scholars in the field. Okay, so what the difference is that they have a lot more analytical depth. They're really going into detail. You're talking about people who've really done their work and they're researching in their field. Um, and it's also in the spirit of evolving these ideas in a process of collaboration, right? So let's say I want to write about a film. I'm going to go see what other scholars in my field have written about that film. Like, so, maybe they're colleagues, or maybe just people about, who are, I want to go see what the top dancer has said about or written. Maybe they wrote an article about the most recent choreography at the Met or whatever. I don't know. I'm obviously not a dance scholar, but the idea is that it is a place where heavily researched, in-depth critical analysis is sort of shared amongst scholars, but it's also open for the most part to the public. Okay, so let's step out for a second and take a look at how we find these things. I want to say before I do that, actually, I'm not trying to say that academic research is way better than non-academic research. It's sort of, you're comparing apples to oranges. They're both research, yes. Is there some really in-depth, even scholarly quality stuff that happens in non-academic circles? Yeah. Is there some stuff that well, let's just put it this way. They're two different things. One, non-academic research, excuse me, has its own value and its own purpose, and is extremely valuable, just as academic and scholarly research has its own value and its own purpose, with its depth and its detail and so on and so forth. So it's not to privilege one over the other, but it's something that we need to be aware of, the difference between these two things. It's also something that we are going to use and start engaging with academic research in addition to our non-academic research and non-scholarly research. So I want to step out of the presentation for a second and go over to our website and talk a little bit about how do I find these sources. So I'm just going to sort of take you, we're going to need to have a couple academic sources in our workshop draft. And it's also valuable, so this, so you can do research, because it's great for idea generation, developing and understanding all the things that I mentioned earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the menu here, and I'm going to scroll down and click on library. Sorry, my son is obviously home today, and he's a little fussy today, so I apologize. So when I click on the library, all I did is I went from, the Montclair EDU homepage, clicked on library, and it brought me to this page. And it says find articles and more, and that's exactly where you want to be. You don't even have to go to the library at all physically to do this research, right? You can do it directly from this search window here. Now, and you can find all kinds of non-academic sources here as well. So I'm looking for academic sources or scholarly sources or peer-reviewed sources. So a couple things you want to do is click full text, because you want the full text of the article, right? Of course. But the other thing you want to do is, as you might have guessed, is click peer-reviewed. And that will make sure that the results that come up in your search are results that are scholarly sources, right? So let's say I'm interested in writing about the documentary Blackfish, right? So I'm going to type in Blackfish right out of the gate. You know what? I might type in documentary. I like to go for broke on my first search. And sometimes this will mean that I will come up with no results. So I'm going to put in Blackfish, documentary, animal abuse, capitalism, right? So these are kind of some of the issues I'm thinking about in relation to my documentary film. And then, so I'm going to put it all in there. I could even put those things in quotes to find those exact terms. Chances are when I do something like this, maybe nothing will come up. But that's okay. I'm just taking a shot in the dark. So look, no results were found. Okay. So, okay, I'm overdoing it here. So some things that I like to do is just go into an advanced search. Okay. And I'm going to type in Blackfish, and I'm going to put documentary. Okay. Now I want to make sure, since I'm in the advanced search now, full text, right? Peer reviewed, just to see how the tick boxes are now in a different place that I switched over to the advanced search. Okay. So Blackfish documentary, let's just stick with that and see what happens. Okay. Um, Okay, so I'm getting 13 results, so that's pretty low, but that's fine. And so what this brings me to obviously is a results page. Now I know, notice how it says academic journal here. That means these sources are scholarly sources, right? I think every single one should be, because I clicked on peer review. And these all should be full text, right? Meaning that we have access to the actual full text. And by we, I mean Montclair State University. They're the ones who apply for these licenses to these databases. So then I can just sort of scroll through the titles, from nihilism to nostalgia, Blackfish, and the contradictions of the nature documentary. So that one seems to be focusing on this notion of nature documentaries and how they're contradictory. Blackfish and SeaWorld, a case study and framing of a crisis. So just so you know, Blackfish is a documentary that was about SeaWorld, the water theme park, treatment of the killer whales. Crisis of legitimacy at SeaWorld, anthropomorphic anthropocentrism and the rhetoric of Blackfish, fishing for future ratings, can a new documentary initiative save CNN? Um, the rhetoric of the real and theme parks and documentary. So a lot of these seem pretty good. Um, the Blackfish effect, corporate and policy change. Blackfish had a real impact in terms of getting people raising awareness around these issues. Um, so some of these don't seem like true places. This seems really, I had a few sources up here that might work great, and that's fantastic. But like a source like this, true places, I'm just out of curiosity. I don't see, how is it about, this article discusses various papers published in this issue, including one by Steve on the documentary Blackfish. So this seems to be some sort of introductory to a journal of Florida studies. The actual article, which would be by Steve Schoen, is maybe something that I could look for elsewhere. I could note the actual journal, click on this, and it'll bring me to that journal page. But and then I could track it down if I really wanted that article. But let's just pick an article that Blackfish and SeaWorld, a case study in the framing of a crisis. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to bring you to like an information page. It's not going to bring you to the article directly. And this is important to think about, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I want to read through this abstract, right? Real quick, right? Before I go in and read, scholarly articles tend to be, 15, 20 pages long sometimes. This one you can see is about 20 or 17, 16 pages long. That's fairly common. But before I dive in and read through a whole article and get into all that, I can just read the abstract that'll let me know if I feel like this article is going to be useful to me. So this research focuses on the crisis in the documentary Blackfish precipitated at SeaWorld. So this seems like it'd be right up my alley, right? Particularly focusing in on what this documentary film did in terms of raising awareness and consciousness around the treatment, animal abuse that was happening at SeaWorld, or that they allege was happening at SeaWorld. And then talking about SeaWorld had a counter framing campaign. So this is a great article. So let's say I want this article. The thing that I can do is click on PDF. All kinds of happenings going on around here. I'm sorry about that. But the thing I can do then is click on the PDF full text. And what that will do will bring me to probably this page. Now, this is where I'm going to need to log in. So this is where, okay, it's going to bunk me out, but I don't know why my computer does this, but it doesn't allow me to log in. There we go. So I'm going to log in, and then it'll bring me to the actual article. Now, one thing I recommend, so it's going to give you the abstract again, but we already read through that. And then you're going to see it's going to be a long article, it's going to be in depth, and I'll talk about how to deal with that and handle that. Try not to be intimidated or freaked out. Remember, scholarly articles are very different from non-academic research in the sense that you're getting somebody who's writing, you're getting people who are basically a conversation or one person's point of view who studies documentary films and studies a lot of things about, in this case, documentary films and their relationship to sort of animal rights or animal abuse. So they're going to be much longer, much more detailed. You're going to see probably a long works cited, right? There's a lot of stuff happening, but try not to be intimidated or overwhelmed. And I'll talk about more of this in a minute. But you'll notice here, so it brings me to the article. I can read it in here. What I actually like to do is just download the thing, click on this button and download it right to your computer. I think it's easier to read, than deal with this sort of window. And that way I can sort of mark it up and have my own copy. Um, Now, one other thing I want to mention about this process, I'm going to go back to the result list here. Let's say I'm writing about a documentary that's very recent, right? So like let's take like there's that new documentary out on Netflix called The Social Dilemma. So I'm going to type in social dilemma and documentary. Chances are that nothing is going to come up. Well, with a name like social dilemma, it's kind of a common phrase. There might be a lot of articles with the phrase social dilemma. So this is kind of a good example of how you can run into some struggles with research. So I'm going to go social dilemma, documentary film, put in, it's a Netflix documentary. So I'm going to try and provide a little more information and see if anything comes up. I would think it won't. I think we'll have zero results. Now, why is that? The reason that's the case is not because Social Dilemma is not a good documentary or a memorable documentary or anything like that. The reason that's the case is because Social Dilemma, the documentary, came out a month ago or earlier this, well, we're into October now. So it came out last month, I believe. Regardless, even if it came out 6 months ago, chances are if your documentary is fairly recent, it will not have much material about it out there in terms of academic sources, right? And the reason for that is because what I said earlier is that academic sources have to go through this long peer review process that takes time. So does this mean, oh no, I shouldn't write about social dilemma documentary because there's no academic sources? No. So what do you do instead? Instead, what I recommend doing is um, doing research around the documentary, which is, are there other documentaries that are similar? I might even type in here documentaries about social media. And just, again, I don't know that anything is going to come up, but let's give it a shot. Oh, and I didn't click peer reviewed, right? So probably going to need to go back and do that again. I can actually do, oh no, full text and peer reviewed. I'm still, you can see over here, I'm still, okay. So I'm bringing up 788, and this stuff looks like it's going to be documentary with ephemeral media curation. I mean, it looks like it's going to be sort of all over the place, right? So, okay, I'm really struggling, right, to find, I do know of another documentary, oh shoot, that Netflix produced as well. Um, but let's say I can't find anything about that documentary film. So like I'm faced, so what do I do then? Well, then you can start researching the issue, right? So with the social dilemma documentary, I mean, it's really about social media and its impact upon our psychology, who we are, our elections. It's about everything. So I might type in social media and mental health. Okay. Now, notice that there's going to be nothing about documentary films brought up here. I've sort of said, okay, I'm not going to really be able to find anything on that my documentary specifically, so I'm going to look up the issue. So potential social media and promoting mental health in adolescents, smartphone and use, smartphones, social media and youth mental health. Excuse me. Mental health problems and social media exposure during COVID-19, multimodal mental health analysis and social media. So what I can do is click on some of these and see like, well, okay, I might be able to find some really good information as far as the way in which, what my documentary is talking about in terms of the way in which social media can really impact people's mental health, right? Um, so they say utilizing focus groups. So this is kind of like a scientific study. We explore the views about the value of social media. Um, uh, Providers are therefore keen to identify effective ways of promoting positive mental health. The themes right in. First, social media appears to have the potential to promote positive mental health. Interesting. So this is almost like the inverse. Second, adolescents frequently utilize social media and the internet to seek information about mental health. Finally, there are benefits and challenges using social media in this way. Um, but they are saying social media does offer a useful way of educating and reaching adolescents about promote mental well-being. Now, this is actually another point I want to bring up, which is like, okay, this article actually seems to go against the argument that the social dilemma documentary is making. Does this mean I need to just like forget this article and dispose of it? No, you could actually use it as a way to address a kind of counter argument, right? And maybe even sort of critique one thing that maybe the social dilemma doesn't consider. And so that could be a counterpoint that you could bring up in your actual analysis, right? And then obviously I have all kinds of other um, um, sources that I found, right? Smartphone, social media use, and mental health. But maybe I wanted to focus in on something more specific, like social media, political elections. Maybe I want to go a little bit more specific with the social issue, or let's just say I have a paragraph that I'm going to talk about in relation to this. What can we learn about social media in the Malaysian election? Social media's contribution to political misrepresentation in the U.S. presidential elections. So I can actually find that stuff. So if I can't find an article that is specifically about my documentary, then I can sort of search around it. The other thing I was thinking we could do is, documentaries about mental health, um, and search for those. Whoops, I included political elections in there. I'm kind of screwing up my search here. But documentaries, and I'm going to put just mental health and see what's out there. I could obviously, this is also something that's good to do for the non academic research. Just get a list of documentaries about how many documentaries are about mental health issues. Can watching a television documentary change the way men view masculinity? So it's going to be kind of all over the place. Um, um, I'll talk about mental health and masculinity. Seems like that's a common issue with mental health. Mental health in the media. Okay, so um, anyway, so even if I can't find an academic article specifically about my particular documentary, there's ways I can search around for articles that will help me that I can use in terms of setting up context or what have you. Okay, so let's go back and I'm going to sort of talk a little bit more about this in this next slide, as you can see. Um, so once I have a couple articles, right, I wanted to sort of tell you about a few sort of critical reading strategies that I use when I'm dealing in particular with academic research. So there's a lot here and a big long laundry list, and I'll move through these fairly quickly. And I already sort of mentioned this at the top. Keep some perspective, right? Don't get intimidated by these long articles written by these, psychology professors or blah blah blah. Yes, there's probably going to be stuff that we don't understand. I pick up some academic articles, and I'm a scholar technically, and I don't understand a number of different things in an article. Try not to let that get you down. I said let things slide. What I mean by that is just skip over it, then skip to the next paragraph, or you could obviously go and look it up, right? You can follow it up and try and figure it out. But it's almost like you're jumping in on a conversation with people, like in the middle of a conversation with people who've been talking about these things a long time. So don't be surprised to feel like, oh my gosh, I feel really lost when it comes to this article, because they might be using a lot of concepts or ideas that are really, things that have been talked about for a long time that you have no idea about. That's okay. You just want to sort of pull what you can from the article. And of course, preview by reading the abstracts, right? So before you sort of dive into these articles and get all sort of lost in it, preview, make sure it's going to be talking about something that will be useful to you. I do a strategic skim, right, which is read the first two or three paragraphs and the last two or three paragraphs. That'll give you probably a sense, if it's an argumentative or analytical article, what the argument analysis is all about. And then the last two or three will give you a sense of kind of what conclusions they've come to. Um, and also get dirty with it in terms of don't be afraid to mark up the text. That's why I say download the article to my own computer, because I like to, and I even print them out sometimes, because I like to draw all over my articles, I write in the margins of all my books. I know that's a nightmare for some people, but I mark up the text. I don't want to have to read it multiple times, even twice. I want to be able to go through it once and point out the things that are useful to me, as well as things I'm confused by. I'll even just put a question mark in the margin of something that confuses me. um, Identify the purpose of the article and hunt accordingly, meaning, like, is this an article that's really just usually with academic articles, you're talking about articles that are making arguments, they're doing critical analysis and argument. But it might just be an article that's giving exposition about something, right? Describing and giving a detailed history or a kind of micro history of an event, or talking about the circumstances under which such and such documentary was produced. So it might not necessarily be argumentative and analytical, but whatever I'm looking for, understand what the purposes of the article, and then I can go and find those things that might be useful to me. Look for key terms and concepts, right? So I recognize, for example, doing some research into like the documentary The Making of a Murderer. I realized there was something called true crime documentary, which maybe everybody else in the world's heard of. I had never heard of that phrase before. So wow, okay, that's something that I can now research. True crime documentary. True crime is something that was a concept that I wasn't familiar with. I put Control F there because once you do download that PDF, I can control. Let's say I find a document. Let's say I find an article about true crime documentaries, and I'm writing about The Making of a Murderer. Type in, hit Control F, which means Control Find, and type in The Making of a Murderer, and it'll take you to every spot in that article where that film is named, without me having to read through the whole article. Identify points of confusion. Ask questions and investigate later. I've identified points to build from, like, ooh, I really like this point that they're making, and I can build on that. I have a little bit more to that I can add. Identify points to contest or counter. Are there things that you disagree with in the article? Sometimes people feel like, oh, this is like a published scholar. Um, the point of these articles is to have conversation, have debate. So there's things that you should feel free to challenge and counter, and that can lead you into new ideas. And then also remember that all these articles are going to have, these academic articles are going to have a works cited, and that'll allow you to sort of follow up. There's going to be a whole list of other sources, probably about your documentary or related to issues in your documentary, that you can go track down and find, should you like. Um, So, what are you looking for as you read through these articles? And again, I have, I think, six, seven different things that you could be looking for. And I've given you some examples here. So, one thing you can look for in these articles is details of context, right? So, what is the context under which your documentary film was released, or the context in relation to the social issue? So here's a quote, like, prior to the film's release, reports of animal abuse at the corporate level have been largely ignored, with only 25% of Americans viewing animal rights as an important social issue. So this is somebody writing about, this is a quote from an essay quoting the statistic from the Jones article, right? Probably about a documentary that's talking about animal abuse, probably Blackfish. It should be no surprise that, so background, you can look for background or expository information, meaning like just info about, who made the documentary, where was it produced. It should be no surprise that The Tiger King is the most streamed show on Netflix, considering the docuseries spent a record 27 straight days in the number one spot. So here, that's not necessarily argumentative or analytical information. Again, it's sort of setting up context. It's just expository information. You can look for details around the social issue. While most don't see the food industry as a problem in our society, sociologist Joe Heath argues that this is because too few of us are aware of its problems. So finding that something that just sets up what is the problem, the debate, the social issue, in relation to the social issue that I'm using to look at my documentary. Um, then details for further evidence, right? To the point, the Department of Justice have themselves cited a lack of racial empathy as a profound reason behind biased policing. This is probably coming from an article about bias in policing, and so they're bringing in this quote. That article might not have said anything about a documentary, even though they're writing about a documentary, but that detail, that further evidence is going to help them make their analysis or their point. Three more, looking for quotes for outside support or backup. And some of these are kind of related, obviously. So, as director Ava DuVernay has stated herself, I don't believe we can move forward until we see and know what is happening. So I can find those quotes that really sort of fit nicely. Most often that's what we're thinking about, right? Oh, I got to find a quote that fits perfectly. You don't have to find a quote that fits perfectly. If you do, great. But most of the time, there's all these other things you can do, and most of the time, it's not going to happen that you're going to find a quote that fits perfectly. But in some cases, you do, and it helps you back up a point that you're already making. Quotes to build from, right? So this person found an article by Alison Venter, and then they are going to build upon her ideas. While the film critic Alison Venter has said the documentary raises important questions about social media, we can see this film doing even more than that in the way that it inspires us to challenge our own social media habits. So here they're taking a quote and then building upon that idea. Here's the counter, like I was talking about before. So finding something that I could counter. Though Phillips argues that Supersize Me is often too gruesome and exaggerated, this exaggeration and harsh imagery of the documentary is actually what leaves its memorable mark on the audience. Right. So this is a person saying like, okay, I see, they read an article by Phillips saying that Supersize Me is way exaggerated and overblown. And they're like, I could see that, but I kind of disagree. I actually think that's why it's powerful. That's why it's useful. So I can bring in that quote. Again, this is where I'm taking a quote that sort of goes against my argument and analysis about Supersize Me in this case. And I'm building upon it, right? I'm letting it launch me into my own idea and my own tank and my own take, my own point of view. Okay, let's move on to documentary analysis. And for this, um, I want to bring us back to, and what I'm doing here is I'm sort of setting up, giving us a little bit of perspective as far as how to sort of analyze, begin an analysis of our documentary film. Um, so, which is something that we're going to be doing in our next discussion board called Prying Eyes. So, I want to remind us of the M2 overview, the overall prompt for this essay that we're going to be working on in the next couple weeks. So we will select a contemporary documentary film or series and analyze how its message about a certain social issue, effectively or not, allows for critical engagement with that issue. Okay, so this is the prompt for the whole essay, really, for the whole module, but for the essay. Now, let's simplify this into sort of three different questions. So, what do I see? So, message is one of the key terms here, and this is not, this shouldn't be unfamiliar from our last module. What do I see as the message of my documentary about X, right? And then, do I feel that this message is effective? Is it powerful, right? And then, what kind of critical engagement does the doc bring about with X? What is meant by critical engagement is sort of up to us as writers. Basically critical engagement implies that there's something positive happening, right? Getting people to do something in relation to the issue. Now that critical engagement could be about awareness, or it could be about inspiring action. It could be both. It could be getting people to have a clear understanding, a better understanding, or it could be inspiring people to support, or it could be getting people to question their own values. It could be people working to have more empathy. So engagement, that critical engagement is something that I need to think about. But here's sort of three questions that I'm going to hold in my mind as far as what I want to answer when it comes to developing my argument and analysis in relation to the film now, or the series, the documentary program. Now, when it comes to analysis, because I want to start with analysis again, here's kind of the question, and it's the question for each of our subclaims. How do different elements of my documentary affect and have a consequence upon the audience in different ways? All right, so let's start there. Okay, so again, this is the method that I think is productive. If you like to start with a central claim first, go ahead and do that. that's perfectly fine. But I often, just to sort of lower the stakes a little bit for myself, I'm going to start with this question and then sort of identify multiple elements from my documentary that I can then start to analyze and think about. Um, so in order to do this, we're going to take, I want to watch a quick clip of a documentary film. Um, Forgive me here. Here we go. And I don't know how well, again, this the volume is going to work here, or the visual. I will link to this clip in the actual discussion board. So if it's not, it's only about it's 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes and 21 seconds. I do want to put a little bit of a disclaimer. This is from a documentary called Restrepo. It's a documentary that shows actual images of war, the war in Afghanistan, actually, to be specific. So there could be violence, there could be blood, even death. Um, I don't, so just a fair warning in advance. Okay, so I'm gonna let this clip roll, and what I'm doing is just I'm looking for elements, thinking about elements.
Big Roger, so it's coming from 1705 and 00. We should be firing on those here right now. Great.
When we started there, we only had maybe 14 guys up there. It doesn't take much. A few automatic weapons to keep a squad pinned down, while they could easily come up from a side and flank you and go basically clear house. Nobody's gonna help you. You're no man.
What we did to mark the anniversary of our dead, we shot off flares. And where Restrepo died, we shot off flares.
Kind of raise one up, say a prayer, say a few words in your head, and move on.
When the boys built that base, Taliban or the AAF forces in the valley, they were completely shot. It was like a middle finger sticking out. And they realized once they could not knock off Ophir Strepo, we had the upper hand. They started becoming afraid. Good job, Tobias! Hey, hit the bottom right. Hit the bottom right of the building. Good job.
I've been on about 4 or 5 different types of sleeping pills. That's what's happened. After cannot sleep, not thinking about it, and you see the picture in my head is pretty bad.
Okay. So again, I apologize if the quality of that was not very good. Just it's the nature of the Zoom here. So go back into the and we're just about done here. Go back into the slideshow. So how do I start to analyze this thing? I mean, as you watch that, I hope you've probably already developed the skill. I mean, we practiced it in our last module, but when I'm thinking like a critical analyzer, I'm starting to look for different elements that I can. And I actually thought of a bunch more just in watching those clips. It was kind of a series of clips. There wasn't like a perfect clip on YouTube, but this one will work just fine. So what I'm watching for, of course, when I'm starting my analysis is different elements, right? So, you know, and then I'm going to be thinking, working those towards analytical points, right? And this is all in the name of working towards subclaims. And a couple of things came up from our last discussion where people were really struggling with sort of like making sure not sounding repetitive in their papers from paragraph to paragraph, support paragraph to support paragraph. How do I make more distinct points? And it's really about the subclaims. The subclaims are the kind of keystone when it comes to that. right? Having distinct analytical points in each support paragraph and distinct elements will help you actually have a more diverse analysis and avoid that repetition. So just speaking generally, and I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, it obviously took me more time to do this. I'm going to sort of pull different elements out of my film. So, documentary film. So here, I'm just going to pull three quick ones from the clips we just saw. There were interviews, there was some combat footage, there was the flare scene. A couple other things that just picked me up was like the use of music. There was that little sort of acoustic guitar at one point. Um, the use of the kind of confidence of the guy at the end of the interview where he says like they were afraid, like it was like a big middle finger, the kind of bravado. But just for now, let's just stick with the interviews, combat footage, and the flare scene, right? And then ultimately, what I want to do is connect these to different analytical points. So the analytical points, right? Now, the reason why those things in the left are yellows because they're elements, just like it says analysis. How do different elements of my documentary do something? So the analytical points need to address two things: effect and have a sense of consequence. So what does that mean? Before I worry about that, I'm just going to sort of say to myself, in relation to each of these elements, what do I think each of them do? What's the effect upon me? So the interviews I thought were really emotional, right? Like they just, part of it has to do with the fact that they're so close, like they're literally zoomed in on their face, super tight, right? And you're like looking into their eyes, which is something that I know I would want to analyze. The combat footage for me was kind of chaotic and sort of, I don't know, upsetting. They're just spraying bullets down into a valley, right? And just sort of saying like, yelling, like screw you, blah, blah, blah. It was just kind of chaotic. I don't know. To me, it was kind of upsetting. The flare scene, I don't know. For me, it had a sense of fear to it. It's kind of, and it was also sort of reflective. The film got really quiet, except for that, and then we had that acoustic guitar, which I would probably bring up in the evidence. Now, on the face of it, this is just me beginning my analysis, right? I don't have like fully developed ideas here yet. This is just the beginning of some ideas that I have in relation to the film. So, a couple things I want to keep in mind. How do I make my subclaim stronger? Well, one is to make the element more specific, right? Um, with the interviews thing, I could make that more specific. The one-on-one close-up interviews. I don't want to like write out a really long description of the interviews. I can do that later in the paragraph. But for the subclaim, I want to have some sort of modifier or descriptor that's going to help me make that more specific. So I brought in the one-on-one close-up interviews. Now, then I want to make sure that there's an effect and consequence in the analytical point. So the one-on-one close-up interviews do what? They allow the audience to see the emotion on soldiers' faces and better understand the trauma of war. Sorry, everybody. Just the dog and the entire family is in the way. It's the nature of doing these recordings. So the one-on-one close-up interviews allow the audience to see the emotion on soldiers' faces and better understand the trauma of war. So notice I have a sense of the effect. What does it do? Well, it allows the audience to see the emotion on the soldiers' faces. And then what's the consequence of that? It allows them, again, I'm always thinking about how it's affecting the audience, right? It's not just what it means or what I think it means. It's about how this is having an effect and a sense of consequence on the audience. It allows people to better understand the trauma of war. Okay. So I did this for all three of these. You'll notice that I'm making the element more specific and then the analytical point stronger. The chaotic combat footage. So instead of just combat, I just brought in a descriptor or modifier, chaotic. The chaotic combat footage does what? It affects the audience by creates an upsetting sense of chaos. It's kind of repetitive there, chaotic, chaos. I might want to switch that. But again, I'm just writing these things out off the top of my head. The chaotic combat footage creates an upsetting sense of chaos for the audience. It's kind of repetitive. And then what does that do? What's the consequence of that? Well, it can realize war's senseless violence, right? So we can understand the war's senseless violence. Finally, with the flare scene, I'm going to put the memorial flare scene. Again, I'm just adding in one word or two word, the memorial flare scene. I'll explain what it is in the next couple sentences in the paragraph. The idea of the subclaim is to just have a clear element and analytical point that are distinct at the very start of the paragraph. So the memorial flare scene builds a sense of sadness and fear such that we can reflect on the loss and death that war media often erases. So again, notice I have a sense of effect, I have a sense of consequence, I've made the element more specific. I'm starting to develop a more distinct and in-depth analysis. And I'm not saying the exact same thing in every paragraph. You can tell that my argument is probably leaning towards showing how this film documentary is making a powerful critique of war. So that's definitely where I'm probably going to be going with my central claim. But how do I write about different things in each? Well, I have different elements and different analytical points with sense of effect and consequence in each subclaim that'll help me write it, talk about different things that are related to the larger idea. All right, everybody. Hope that gives you some ideas in terms of how to develop your analysis. Um, Looking forward to getting sort of narrowing down our foci and uh, getting into much more depth with our analysis, as well as using our research to help us do that. Um, Talk to you soon. Thanks for watching.